All righty. Good morning, everyone. My name is Doris Rodriguez, and we'll get started in just a few minutes while we give people a moment to get situated. So if you need to get anything, please do so now. We'll start in a couple of minutes. I also want to be sure to announce that this presentation is available with automatic closed captioning. Additionally, we are providing simultaneous interpretation in Spanish this morning, for which I now will provide instructions for our Spanish Zoom attendees to join. Hoy siempre brindamos servicios de interpretación simultánea para nuestros eventos, igual en persona o en Zoom. Favor de hacer clic en el globo al fondo de su pantalla donde dice interpretación. Luego haga clic en el idioma que desea escuchar. En este caso, español. Si quiere escuchar solo al intérprete, puede también hacer clic en el Mute Original Audio, que silenciará el audio original. Muchísimas gracias y de nuevo, bienvenidos a Sinergia. Estamos agradecidos a tenerlos aquí. Si me dan un segundito, if you guys can give me 1 second. Before we begin, I want to let you know that we are now broadcasting today's event live via our Facebook page and want to give a warm welcome to those joining us there. Everyone who registered via Zoom will receive a copy of the presentation slides via follow-up email within the next few days. A survey will be shared in the chat and a QR code at the end of the presentation. We will have time at the end of the presentation for your Q&A. So we encourage questions at any time. However, please remember this is a public forum and we're being broadcasted on Facebook. My name is Doris Rodriguez, and I am the Autism Initiative Coordinator here at Synergia's Metropolitan Parent Center. A few words about Synergia's Autism Initiative. The Autism Initiative project is funded by a grant from the New York City Council under its Autism Initiative. This project supplements the work of Synergia's Metropolitan Parent Center by bringing increased awareness to New York City's residents, particularly to the community with large Spanish-speaking populations, about the growing number of children diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Its strong outreach components target families of children with suspected or known diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder who are not receiving appropriate educational, health, and other related services. This initiative will link them to other services and supports to meet the individual needs of children and families. I want to thank you all for joining us. We're glad that you chose to be here with us today. Before we get started, I would like to introduce our presenter for today. I want to welcome Ms. Rima Izquierdo, the trainer and developer here at the Metropolitan Parent Center at Synergia. So glad you can join us today. We have so many questions, so I'll let you get to it. For those of you joining us after the presenters conclude the presentation, we'll have a question and answer session. If you're joining us via Facebook Live, if you have questions, please place them in the comments section. Now I'll hand it over to you, Rima. Thank you.
Thank you and good morning. Again, my name is Rima Izquierdo, and I am the trainer and developer at the Synergia's Parent Center. I'll give you a moment. All right, so good morning, everybody. We're going to be talking about placement, schools, IEPs, and what to do if you don't have one. So again, just housekeeping, this presentation is being recorded and the slides will be shared after. And we will also have a question and answer session directly following. Today, we will cover the following topics. What is placement? What is an IEP? Placement recommendations. What should you do when you don't have a placement? And who can help you with placement? Followed by a question and answer and a survey. Again, Synergia is a multicultural agency that was founded in 1977. And our Metropolitan Parent Center has been open since 1995. We have a birthday next year. And we offer trainings and workshops, as well as other components of our program, such as our bilingual special education advocacy one-to-one, which we do have availability if anyone needs support. And our autism initiative. We are a parent center, one of the 3 federally funded in New York City. And our autism initiative programs are now open. I won't go over the program because Doris did, but just know that you can contact intake, and our transition program is available for registration. We have our arts program and our bi-monthly Spanish speaking support group. So let's get into it. What is placement? So placement refers to the type of school or setting where students will be having their IEPs implemented. It is not the specific school. So placement is where your student will receive the services in their IEP, and there are requirements for the placement, but it does not guarantee you a placement at a specific school. So you may require a District 75 placement, but it doesn't guarantee that you will go to this school across the street from your house. Placement is where a student will receive what is outlined in their IEP, which is the individualized education program. And this outlines the placement recommendations for the student, so the class setting, the services, and any accommodations or modifications. So again, this program is the set of services. It's everything included that has been identified for these students to be able to meet their unique academic needs. The school must provide what the IEP mandates the student receive as per federal law, and this law is called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. IDEA is what guarantees students their rights when they have a disability, and we'll go into that further. What is an IEP? An IEP, again, stands for Individualized Education Program. And this is the blueprint, the map, this is the plan for how a student's needs will be met in the classroom. So there's special education and related services that are given to them under IDEA, like we just mentioned, and the scope of the activities and settings it will cover. So it's going to tell you the school type, right? So it may tell you a specialized program, it may say a special class, and it may say how many times you're going to receive a certain support in a certain class or a certain related service. It may say 2 times 30 of occupational therapy. And again, these are specific to individual students' unique needs, hence the name individualized. Again, the federal law, IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. I want everyone to remember that. It's one of the most important acronyms because it is what guarantees rights to your student and safeguards them. And again, this is the law that spells out exactly why and how a school system, a school district, New York City Public Schools, a non-public school must carry out what is written in the IEP. And again, as mentioned, this is the responsibility of the school. So this is not the parents' responsibility, although it is really great to have the support of the family and ensure that they are also on top of things and being active and equal partners, but it is the school's responsibility. So let's go into the continuum of education in New York City. So at the very bottom in the darker green, we have general education, and that's the largest chunk of where you're going to see most students being educated. In general education setting, you can see different recommendations like integrated co-teaching services, also known as ICT. You may see special education teacher support services. I'm sure everybody knows this as SETS. And this is in the general education classroom. And this kind of speaks to least restrictive environment. So this is the least restrictive environment available is general education and services within the general education class. So you could have a student with a disability that has an IEP that calls for a general education classroom placement but receive services within this general education classroom. Then we have special education teacher supports and services, also SETS again. I'm going to keep spelling out the acronyms because I really want you guys to remember them. And this would be in a separate location. So this service would not be provided in the classroom with the non-disabled peers. This would be provided in a separate place. Maybe it would be a service room. Maybe it would be another classroom. With space concerns in New York City, it could be a hallway, just the reality of the landscape here. But this would not be in the classroom. Then the next more restrictive setting would be special class. And special class may refer to a 12-1 in a general education school, right? So there could be a school that offers, a community school, and they may offer general education classes, and then they may have this other setting, and this setting would be a self-contained class, and all the students in this class would have a disability, and this class would typically be typically is a 12-1, could be maybe an 8. And again, we'll talk about what that means in a minute. Special class in a specialized school would be the next more restrictive setting. And this is a special class, so the smaller class that has all students with disabilities, self-contained, but in a specialized school. So this may be like a District 75 program. So District 75 is not a place, it's a service, and it's provided within all communities in all the districts in New York City, 1 through 32, but it's highly specialized in that it only services students with disabilities. So every student in this school would have a disability, and then the special class would be within the special school because the school has a specific structure that supports students with disabilities in addition to the special class for students that need more intensive supports and services. And then the next restrictive settings up would be home and hospital instruction, where this may be a student has medically necessary instruction and they have a condition that requires them to be educated at home, or there is a medical reason that they're hospitalized. Maybe a student has sickle cell or another condition, and they may be in and out of the hospital. And so they're still mandated to receive their free and appropriate public education. And so the school would then coordinate services either at the hospital or at the home. And again, this is not full day instruction. So I just want to remind everyone it's not going to look like what school looks like in the school setting, in the building, but they are still mandated to provide their services and instruction. And then the next would be non-public day and residential schools. And these schools are when the options available within New York City public schools doesn't fit the needs of the student. And so other options have been considered, and then they would need schools that are highly specialized. And these schools tend to be specific to classification. And then that would be like a day program where a student would still go to school, come back. And then residential, if there's a student that has really intense needs, that may need 24-hour support from trained staff. So now we're going to get into placement recommendations. So within the continuum that we just discussed, New York City public schools and, the city and state have different options that they would recommend on a student's IEP. So in these actually are the way they appear in the system where they generate your IEP. So it would say NYCPS stands for New York City Public Schools. NYSED stands for New York State Education Department. So in the IEP, it would say NYCPS School Non-Specialized District 1 through 32. And that's when you have a school within the Department of Education, within New York City Public Schools, and it is a regular community school that is located maybe in your district. It is not specialized and services all students. Then you would have a New York City Public School specialized school, which again would be like District 75, where you would have this recommendation in the setting, and this would indicate that the District 1 through 32 schools did not meet the needs of the student, and so the student was then recommended for specialized school. NYSED approved non-public school day is that's also known as the NPS school, non-public schools, NPS. And approved is when it's state approved. So NYSED is the state. So when we say the state, it's the New York State Education Department. NYSED approved these NPS schools to be authorized to provide education to students that have been identified as not being able to be served in their District 1 through 32 schools or in the specialized schools offered. And so we're going to go into what you can do when you don't have placement, but then these are options that become available when the options that New York City Public Schools offers don't meet the needs of the student. And then NYSED approved non-public school residential, same thing, except when the day program doesn't meet the needs and the student requires the 24-hour intensive support, then a residential placement would be recommended. And then we mentioned home and hospital instruction. That's exactly how it would appear. And for more information on that, on referral evaluation, the IEP meeting, and placement, you can contact the Department of Education, now known as New York City Public Schools, Office of Home Instruction. And when we send these slides out, you'll have the links to that information at the bottom of this slide. So class sizes and ratios. So within District 1 through 32 and charter schools, you'll find an ICT setting. And this would be in the general education class. So you'll have, so we're starting with the general education class, and that's just everybody, right? That's every student, no IEP necessarily. You could have an IEP and not require a special class, or you could just have like a push-in service. So as we mentioned, sets in the classroom, that's known as a push-in service, and that's available in all of the other options of schools, so districts 1 through 32. And then we have the ICT, which is the integrated co-teaching class. And that class is also available in District 1 through 32 schools and charter schools. And that again is when some students have a disability, typically 40%, and some students do not have a disability, typically 60%. And there are typically 2 teachers, and the teachers are a general education and a special education teacher, and they support the class together. And then there's the District 75 inclusion, which is a student may be recommended for District 75, but they're going to participate in inclusion classes, which means that they'll spend the day with their typically developing peers in general education classes with the support of District 75 staff and services. So we mentioned again ratios, and we said 12:1 and 8:1. So that stands for, the first number is always going to be the number of students plus the next number, which is going to be the number of teachers. and there may or may not be another number at the end of that, and that number is going to stand for the number of paras. And this is class size and ratio. Now, I want to be clear, the number of paras is is it's the number of classroom paras. So then if a student has a para that is a one-to-one to them, or if two people share a para, that's not going to be reflected in this ratio because those paras are in that classroom for specific students. If there's a third number at the end, that means that those paras or that para is for the class. And then we have self-contained classes, which would be the next class sizes and ratios. And we have 12-1, 12-1-1, and 15-1. Again, 12 students, one teacher, 12 students, one teacher, one para. These are offered in District 1 through 32 schools, and some charter schools, it may or may not be available, but it should be. And these are, again, self-contained classes, which means self-contained stands for every student in the class has a disability. And these classes, again, are within our standard District 1 through 32 programs. So they're not in specialized schools, but they are special classes. District 75 or non-public school, MPS again, we will keep on with the acronyms. 12-1-1, 12-1-4. So these are self-contained classes. They look the same as the ones above, except these are located in special schools. So they're special classes in special schools. I want to make a note about the 15-1 above. The 15-1 is a high school setting. So when a student is in middle school and they are going to graduate into high school, the IEP should be changed from a 12-1 to a 15-1 because the 12-1 setting doesn't exist in the District 1 through 32 schools. So that mandate wouldn't be able to be provided because in high school they increased the number. Again, if they need the 12-1, then that's a consideration for a different program at the high school level. Back to District 75. So 12-1-4, that setting is, so it's 12 students, one teacher, 4 paras. That setting is typically for students with multiple disabilities that need intensive support throughout the school day. And so you may find students that have mobility issues or that need feeding support. And this is a highly specialized setting, which you would only find in certain schools. So you would really need to contact the schools. Not every District 75 site is going to have 12-1-4. Not every District 75 school is going to have every setting, right? Every class ratio, but it also won't necessarily have that ratio for every student. So that's a conversation to have during the IEP meeting when you're transitioning. And then we have District 75 NPS 811. That's just a smaller class. So it's very rare, and I should have added it, that you may see that in a District 1 through 32 school in 8-1. That would be a bridge class. Again, not all schools offer that, but just so that everyone here knows, it is possible, but it is typically only seen in District 75 or NPS schools. Again, NPS is non-public. And then 611, same thing. 611 would not be a bridge class. That would be the most restrictive setting that New York City Public Schools offers. Other placement recommendations. Within New York City Public Schools, there are programs outside of the established continuum that we discussed, so the chart with all the colors. There are these specialized programs that fall kind of in between gray spaces within what the New York City Public Schools or the Department of Education offers. So the first group we'll talk about are the autism programs, which are Nest, Horizon, and AIMS. Nest is an ICT class, so but it is a reduced size ICT class, so it will still see that 40% students with disabilities, 60% not, but Nest caps their classes at 6 students with a disability. So you wouldn't see more than 6 in a Nest class. Again, that's an ICT class. So these programs are within the District 1 through 32 continuum, and they are within the ICT, but they are a specialized program. So it's a specialized program within the District 1 to 32. Horizon is also a specialized program. And again, these are autism programs. So they are specific for the classification of autism. And the Horizon program is also within the District 1 through 32 continuum, but it is a special class in that it is self-contained and you will not see that ICT model. And then you have AIMS. AIMS is also another pretty hard to find program, servicing kindergarten to 2nd grade. And also within that continuum. So there is a special application process for that. And we do have the links included in this presentation. So you could be applying to a District 1 through 32 program and also separately applying to the specialized programs here. ACES is another program that is for students with intellectual disabilities or multiple disabilities within Districts 1 to 32. Then we have bilingual special education. This is an ICT class or special class, so you're required to have this. So again, all of these have eligibility criteria, and again, we're talking about placement. We do have other trainings that are recorded on our YouTube page that go into detail about these programs. But I did want to mention, because we have a high population of Spanish-speaking families, that bilingual special education is it requires on the IEP that you have the ICT or the special class with a language of instruction other than English. And we included at the end of this the contact information for these offices. So if anybody is interested, you can reach out or you can reach out to us and we can support. iRead is another program for students with dyslexia and other print-based reading disabilities. PATH is a program for students that have behavioral concerns and disability. And then barrier-free and accessible schools, it's not really a specialized program, but it is a placement setting that is done centrally, because unfortunately many of our school buildings are not barrier-free and accessible, and there are different types of accessibility. There's partially accessible, there's not accessible, there's fully accessible. There are concerns with elevators. So any student that requires a barrier-free or accessible school is going to be placed centrally to ensure that the school meets all their needs. Then we have other placement recommendations, NPS, which again we mentioned are non-public schools. And these are going to be NYSED approved non-public schools. So again, NYSED, New York State Education Department. And this is for students whose educational needs cannot be met in public school programs. This should only be considered when all public school settings cannot meet your child's needs. Again, so let's kind of go into that. Students whose needs cannot be met in a public school, that looks different sometimes, right? So sometimes you have a student who is actively in a program and the program is not meeting the needs. Then you may have a student who is entering the system. Maybe you're in kindergarten, right? Or maybe you're transitioning into 6th grade. So you're in the placement process, and the school that they're offering is not appropriate in the fact that it doesn't meet all the needs of your IEP. Um, these are the situations where this may be considered. And again, when we mean only considered, when all public school settings cannot meet the needs, we don't mean that you have to try every public school setting, but we do mean that the team has to have considered it. So, right, it will say, uh, setting considered rejected because. And so it'll say we considered this 12-1, we considered this ICT class, we recommended the District 75 because, and then it'll say the 12-1 did not meet the needs of the student. Or maybe you get the 12-1 and you reject the District 75 because it's too restrictive. So these are some things to consider when this conversation is being had. And then these schools are highly specialized, and usually they only cater to one or two like specific disability classifications. Again, disability is classified under IDEA. So there are the 13 established classifications, and students would have to be identified and classified under those. And again, the schools will cater to specific disability classifications. So that is another consideration when looking at these options. And then the IEP will list NYSED approved non-public school or defer to CBST. And we'll go into those two. Defer to CBST is CBST is Central Based Support Team. And defer to CBST just means that the IEP team did not come to a recommendation. They did not make a recommendation, or that the recommendation is that the central based support team support the family, and that is who applies to these non-public school programs for you. So it would always have to be through the central based support team, but we'll talk about how we get to NPS schools in a little while. How programs support placement. So as mentioned, the IEP is a program, and the program has a lot of components that we put together to create this plan, right? This map, this guide, this blueprint to support a student. So for example, and this is not an exhaustive list, there are other things that could be listed, but this is a pretty detailed list, and it's directly from the state website. So these are options that are available under IDEA. So let's go into a couple of scenarios. So, right, let's say we have a student and they need, let's say that a student is considered for a special school. So let's say District 75, but they're also considered for 12-1 in a community school. And the reason that they're considered for District 75 is because they need a lot of support in class. The IEP team could use these related services to build out a program that supports most students in the community school, in the 12-1, rather than doing the 12-1 in the special school, and allowing the student to have access to the least restrictive environment and the opportunity to be educated with their non-disabled peers, which again are rights that are afforded to all students with disabilities. So let's say the student has difficulty writing. The student could be given occupational therapy and could have push-in sessions where the occupational therapist supports the student, maybe during writing class, or maybe during ELA when they know they're going to be working on writing assignments. Let's say that a student, has trouble being organized. You could implement some So we're going to I'm going to put it under assistive tech, but this is instructional tech. You can give a student a device to help them, or graphic organizer, to assist them in being more organized, to be able to follow in a class. Let's say a student has difficulty with written homework. You can have assistive technology where they can receive the homework digitally, and their assignments, and they can send them back digitally, or a combination. They can receive them digitally and then write them, or write and do digitally. But you can combine these services in different ways to be supportive of students. Physical therapy, maybe getting to class or getting around is an issue, and providing the physical therapy may help the student to be able to access, let's say, a school on a third floor with no elevator, right? So there are different scenarios where these related services can support a student's program to make a least restrictive environment accessible to them, and to the best of the school's abilities, make the general education curriculum accessible to students. We will talk a little bit about specialized transportation in a bit. And then also paraprofessionals, right? So that's a big one that I think should really be discussed more, because there are a lot of different paraprofessionals that can be implemented to support a student. It doesn't always have to be a one-to-one para. It can be a transition para if a student just has difficulty transitioning from one activity to another. It can be again, like if you need a one-to-one para, there can be a crisis para or a health para. So if it's a crisis para, it's understood that this is behavioral. There's usually other things that go into that, but the student would get the support they need, versus a health para, which may just be about a medical condition, and they may not need as much intense support throughout the day as much as oversight. So there are a lot of different ways to work services to make them support your placement, to make a placement accessible for a student. Admissions and placement, New York City Public Schools. So we have admissions offers, which would be like the typical District 1 through 32 application process. And these entry points would be at kindergarten, 6th grade, which is known as the middle school transition, or 9th grade, which is the high school transition. So 5th going into 6th and 8th going into 9th. And if you're in pre-K going into kindergarten, or if you're not in school, just going into kindergarten. That's typically when a student turns 5. You would get, so when you do the admissions process, you get a school location letter plus prior written notice. And this is, again, so the admissions process is for everybody. And then when we go into school location letter, when we're talking about students with disabilities and the IEP process. And so the school location letter is going to tell you where the student's going to go to school. And it's going to tell you what the recommended services are. Prior written notice is also known as PWN, because who doesn't love acronyms? And that is also mandated to be included. Sometimes they don't send the location letter, but prior written notice always has to be sent, and you can request the location letter. If the location letter is not sent, typically families do find out what their offer is and where you may go to school. Now we have placement letters. So the placement letters are going to come from the central office, and these are going to be for specialized schools. So we mentioned District 75, we mentioned NPS schools. These schools, through the IEP process, they will then be considered for these programs, and Central will send a placement letter. District 75 placement, there's no big science to it. They are just sent in batches. And so it's good to get your IEP meeting done as soon as possible, because once your package, so to speak, is ready, that will be sent, and it's really just first come, and they just place, and then the next batch is sent, and the next batch, and so you want to watch out for your placement letters. You want to make sure that you're looking at your placement, right? So um, you want to take a look at the school that's in your school location letter and your recommendation and make sure that they match, and then go take a look at the school. You can ask for another placement. It's they don't have to give you another one, but if you can prove that this placement is not appropriate or not the most appropriate, and we'll talk about what happens when they don't have your services later, but you can request another placement. You would then receive another placement letter. And also you would get a placement letter for specialized programs. So Nest Horizon, all the programs that we discussed in the last couple of slides. And again, because those are done centrally, you would then be in this process. So you could essentially receive an admissions offer through the District 1 through 32 application process and receive a letter from a central office if you've applied to a specialized program, for example. And then barrier-free accessible schools, as we mentioned, you would also get a letter for those. And as I mentioned, a new placement will result in a new placement letter. You want to make sure that if you're offered a placement that you have the placement letter and that it says the placement that you are offered. You don't want the situation of speaking to someone on the phone and they are, oh yes, you're talking to the placement officer and they're telling you that you got into the school that you wanted and, your student and everything you can start. And then you don't have it written, and then you find out that they actually don't have the seat available, or that the seat that they have available is not appropriate for your student. And so you just want to make sure everything in writing. And we will talk about that too. I want to pause for questions. So Doris, are there any questions? Because I know that that's a lot of information. So I'd like to pause and see if we have any questions that we could answer before we move on.
We do have questions from our pre-registration. Currently in the Zoom chat, we have one question, and that is, when should you begin applying to have a good chance of placement for middle school?
So the middle school process has an application period, so you can't apply beforehand, but you can start looking at schools. There are some families that when their kid is born, they already start looking at schools and they kind of start mapping things out. Maybe that's soon, maybe. But at any time, especially like within the 2 years of getting to that grade. So middle school is sixth grade. So I want to say by fourth grade, maybe you want to start looking into programs and passively getting information, and attending tours and open houses and looking for parents that go there, speaking to parents that have actual experience in the programs is always a really good way to get a sense of what the environment is really like. And so there's not a right answer. But typically I would say the year before is a good time because the information shouldn't change too much and you have more time to look around, and going through it that first time, when you do it the next year, you'll kind of have a better idea of what to expect and how to go about it. But again, middle school, kindergarten, high school, the application periods are timed. So the application opens at a certain period and then it closes at a certain period. And those dates can fluctuate, but you should be receiving emails and communications from your school letting you know that the application is coming up. And we also have some information here in our links and resources that you can look at that will outline the IEP process. Thank you, Doris. So now I see a couple of questions in the Q&A. So I'll take the 2 questions, and then we'll go back to the presentation, and then we'll take the rest of the questions later. So I see I received a T5 letter. So T5 is turning 5, although they are moving away from turning 5, and now we're calling it the kindergarten IEP process, also known as KIP. The parent says, I received a T5 letter for specialized school and special class. I visited the school, but it was not good for my daughter. I fought for a D75, but community 1211 was recommended. What do I do? Okay, so in this case, so your child is entering kindergarten. That's what the turning 5 process is, which is now called kindergarten IEP process or KIP. And you want the specialized school. So what they offered was the District 1 through 32 school, 1211, which is the special class, and what you want is the District 75 school. So now what you would do is go into your student's IEP and look at the present levels of performance and look at what they say your child can do and what your child cannot do. And then you also know what your child can and cannot do. You're going to take those things and you're going to use that as your justification for why this school is not appropriate. So if the school, this depends on why you feel the school is not appropriate. If you feel the school is not supportive enough, you have to state why you feel the school is not supportive enough. If the school doesn't have all the services that she needs, you can reject the placement. And we'll talk about that a little later about when the placement doesn't have what the IEP requires. But when you don't like the school, right? And we don't say we don't like, we say we feel the school is not appropriate. So I appreciate the way you said it. Then we have to look at each individual thing and why this other school would be better. And it does help when you identify a specific school that you think would be better, because then you can say things about that school that you feel is better. This school doesn't have this, and this one has that. I took my daughter to this school and she did not identify with her peers. I took my daughter to this school and she felt like she belonged. So there are, and again, you want to base it on your present levels of performance. You want to base it on IDEA. So what are they supposed to provide? They're supposed to provide a free and appropriate public education. They're supposed to provide the least restrictive environment. If you feel that that environment is not restrictive enough, it's not supportive enough, that's a conversation, and that's the way you say it, is that this is not supportive enough for my students' unique needs. And then you list the unique needs as it pertains to education. And again, you can always contact the Parent Center. I'll share our intake information, which my colleague has been sharing throughout the presentation. And so you can always get one-to-one special education advocacy support from us here at the Parent Center. But that's kind of the way you start to frame that conversation when you're having, when you're having a conflict of interest, so to speak, with the placement, or where you don't agree. All right, so next question, I'll take one more and then I'll go back. I'm gonna go to the comment that so this parent says, my gut wanted a community but fought for D75. I am disappointed the community did contact me. And again, you can still fight for what you feel is best for your student. The New York City Public Schools is still open. School did, District 75 programs ended yesterday, but the district staff is still there. And the District 1 through 32 summer rising programs end Thursday or Friday. So you still have the next 2 days to contact these offices, or then you can escalate. But I would try now while these offices are still open. All right, next question. Un estudiante estuvo en una charter tuvo evaluaciones y le realizaron el RIP, va para una escuela del D75, ¿quién lo transfiere? So, all schools, New York City Public Schools is in charge of ensuring that services are delivered in New York City for all schools. So charter schools, private schools, parochial schools, all roads lead back to New York City Public Schools. So the special education office deals with all of those different settings because it has the obligation of special education as per as per the state, NYSED. So I'm going to continue as the state, but remember, I'm talking about New York State Education Department, which is NYSED. Even if the student stayed in the charter school, the New York City Public Schools is still obligated to ensure that the student is getting everything that they need. So now that the student has been identified to need District 75, as we mentioned, that's going to come from Central, right? So, and enrollment this year moved from the District 75 office to enrollment. So we have placement in District 75. That placement office has now been moved to the central office of enrollment. So the central office of enrollment now deals with all districts 1 through 3275. And so they're going to have to be involved in the transfer. And that the IEP, once the IEP is done, it's going to get sent to that placement team, and that placement team is going to make an offer to the parent. If the parent has a preferred school, they should identify that in the IEP meeting, but if that's already happened, as soon as possible, so that that placement can be considered. And it's really helpful if you have a relationship with the principal or if you have a conversation with them and they know that you're considering this. You can ask them if they have an opening. You can call schools, just look up schools online, call the school and ask them if you can tour. You know, it's not prohibited. You're allowed to ask. The worst they could do is say no. It may be outside of the placement period and they have specific times for tours. That happens. But in general, that's that's everyone's job. So, but that falls to Central. Just to be clear about who's in charge of that transfer and making sure that that student gets to the right place. I'll take the last question. Hello, once a student graduated from high school and is 18 years old and autistic, is it possible to come back to a school setting if his needs are not met completely and has trouble to get a placement elsewhere? So that depends. If a student graduated and they met the graduation requirements, then no. But there are programs that are available for people with disabilities as adults, and there are different agencies that offer different programs. So at this point, you may look at something like Access VR, and Access VR is vocational rehabilitation, and they may have some programs to support. Again, it really depends on the level of function of the individual. So Access VR may or may not be appropriate, but then there are programs, there's Job Corps, there's other programs that aren't necessarily for people with disabilities, depending on what the concerns are. So you said if the needs are not met, that depends on what you mean by that, right? There are community habilitation programs and there are vocation programs where they could get work at and be employed, or day programs that they can go be in the community, or other day programs where you're in a facility because maybe you need more support. It really depends on the student, not the student because they graduated, on the individual. But you can always contact our intake line. We do have a separate program outside of the Parent Center for adults with disabilities that may be of interest and support. All right, back to our slide deck. So placement, school year. We have 10-month programs that run from September to June in District 1 to 32. And then we have our 12-month programs, which are summer programs, summer school, summer rising, extended school year. And these run July and August. So now the 10-month programs, some of our specialized programs are considered 10 months, and then the 12-month portion would be for supports and services. So for example, Nest and Horizon are 10-month programs, but then you would get the 12-month program, but it wouldn't be academic, it would be about social development and to receive the services. You have extended school year, right? So everybody is entitled to 10-month program in districts 1 to 32. 12-month program is really for students that need that extra support, that may regress, to a point where, it's to a point where more services may be needed. And so rather than allow the regression, which sometimes schools call summer slide, you would then offer extended school year to maintain what the student has developed. And again, that's ESY, extended school year. And that may be a student may have a 10-month program that is recommended for 12 months. So they'll take part in the 10-month program, September to June, in their D1 through 32 school. And then they'll have extended school year. Same with District 75, although it's a little less broken up. District 75 is pretty good at their continuity throughout the summer. They are a bit more academic, so it's kind of business as usual, but a little more laid back. And students get all their services just like the regular school year. District 75 Summer School is also known as Chapter 683, and it ended yesterday. And then we have Summer Rising, which is, I guess, what we're starting to call summer school, but it's not summer school in that it's fully academic. So there is that academic portion, and then there is that camp-like portion afterwards, run by the community-based organization. Summer Rising is not guaranteed to all students. It's a lottery, so you apply and you hope you get lucky. There You also have to consider when you get a Summer Rising offer, if it's not in the school that your student attends, to ensure that they have the ability to cater to your students' needs. And again, that is the school that's doing the academics before 12 and the community-based organization that takes care of your student from 12 to 5:30. And again, every school does not run programming during the summer, but you have the right to request it elsewhere. So what does that mean? So extended school year. We see a lot of families that don't get offered extended school year that could really benefit from it. And sometimes this is because the school itself doesn't offer summer school. It's not open in the summer. And so the family is not offered this option. You always have the option to ask. You may have to prove your case, right? You may have to prove that your student regresses during breaks. So I recall having to do that once in the past, where during the Christmas break, or the holiday break, the winter break rather, excuse me, that I would always see regression in my student. And so that supported the request to then say, every time there's a gap in school, I recognize that my student regresses. And so with summer being such a big gap, this is why I feel they need it. And so that's kind of the way you would write that, always in writing. Again, you can talk as much as you want, but make sure that you document. Also, District 75. District 75 programs are 12-month programs by definition, but I have come across families that were not offered summer program. And again, In my experience, it has always been when the District 75 school is not open in the summer. But most, if not all, District 75 schools are multi-sited, so they have multiple sites. Another site may be open that is available for the student to go to, or like summer rising. Every school does not offer summer rising, so they will not be open, but there are home schools where the students from this area will go to this school over here. And, with summarizing, at least they try to make it localized by people's homes. And then if you do get to the wait list process, it may be wherever. But again, if a program is not, if a school is not running program in the summer, you still have the right to request it, but you may have to prove why you need it. Summer timelines. So May to June is summarizing. If you do the process initially when it comes out, this year the offers came out in May. Process started in April. It was early this year, but it could be up to June. And you could also get on a wait list, right? So if you applied in April and you got a placement in May, and then you got waitlisted to 3 other places or every other option that you put in, which is what happens, you may have really wanted one of your waitlist options. And so you then can watch the waitlist and check if you're getting an offer. So when you check your My Schools account, you can see if you can see your offer and you can see your wait lists. And then it will tell you, you'll get an email notification, or you were offered a spot on your wait list. So you could reject the spot you got in May and take the spot that they offered from your wait list in June. So just want to be clear about timelines and timelines, why sometimes the timelines seem flexible even if they're not. And we'll definitely talk about that more on the next slide. June. So summer school should be, you should know where you're going to summer school by June. Particularly promotion in doubt. Typically those letters go out earlier in the year, as early as January. January is when they do the mid-year assessments, and promotion in doubt letters could be sent as early as then. They could be sent as late as May, but they really should be sent as soon as the promotion is in doubt. And that means that a student is in danger of failing, or is failing, or is not performing well to the point that they may not make the requirements to be promoted to the next grade. Again, that's promotion in doubt. You might see it as PID. And then June 15th for D75, an extended school year. This is not written anywhere that I could find, but June 15th, so IDEA guarantees specialized transportation and your IEP recommended program. If you're recommended for 12-month program, you have to know where you're going to school by June 15th, because it takes 2 weeks to put busing in. So if it, well, 10 school days, so let's just say 2 weeks. If it takes 2 weeks to put in the school bus transportation accommodations, you won't get to school in the first day if they give an offer after that. And so that, it's not a hard deadline, but it is the deadline, because busing will not happen if it's not done by then. And then again, must have placement before school begins. And school typically begins the first week of July, depending on where you're going. So some MPS and charter schools started as early as July 1st. New York City Public Schools started summarizing July 2nd, and District 75 July 3rd. So, there are different start dates for whatever school your student is going to attend, but you have to have that placement before school begins, and it has to be within enough time to provide specialized transportation accommodations if that is mandated in the IEP. timelines continued. So 10-month programs. So 10-month programs are so there's the application process, and then the offers come out, and you're typically notified by April or May where you're going to be in this process. For kindergarten, it's in May, and you should be getting green letters, and those are the school location letters with the prior written notice, as mentioned earlier. Now these are deadlines. These are federal deadlines. So June 15th is the deadline for rising kindergartners with pre-K IEPs. So if you're in pre-K and you have an IEP, right, we call that turning 5. So if you're in the turning 5 process, which we are now calling the kindergarten IEP process, which is also going to be known as KIP or is known as KIP, the deadline is June 15th. If you don't have a placement by June 15th, the department is out of compliance, and then we'll talk about some other options you have available to you. August 15th is another deadline, and this is for new 10-month programs. So by August 15th, everybody should know where their program is. Now, June 15th and August 15th are deadlines established through a federal court case known as Jose P., which actually was a client of Synergia. And these are dates that are in the federal law, which again is IDEA, and there are certain protections families have should the department not give an offer by these deadlines. Just so everybody knows, tomorrow is August 15th. So if you have not received the placement, please keep checking your mail. Again, it must be mailed by August 15th, so that might buy them a day or two. But if you don't have a placement by postmarked August 15th, then we'll talk about the escalation path. And again, I'll keep saying it, you must have placement before school begins. Student transportation. So we're not going to go into this in detail. That's a whole nother training, but we will mention just a couple of key points. Check your student's IEP for their transportation mandate and accommodations. You need to know what your mandate is, right? And so you need to make sure they're getting everything they're supposed to get. Check your NICSA account or call your school's transportation coordinator to find out your bus company and route information. And any changes in transportation, again, like I mentioned, can take 2 weeks to go into effect. So if a change is made in placement and there has to be a change in transportation, you need to make sure that happens immediately because, again, it's going to take 10 school days. And again, your transportation is part of your IEP program, and so it is a mandate and should be followed, all components. Language access. Remember that the district is obligated to provide prior written notice as well as any documents related to the evaluation and placement in the parent's native language, consistent with state and federal regulations of determinations made, the reasons for the determinations, and the parent's right to request additional assessments. And for support with translation or interpretation, you can contact the New York City Schools at hello@schools.nyc.gov, or you can call 718-935-2013. No placement, now what? My placement offer does not have everything mandated in my IEP. So the first thing you're going to do is document if the school cannot provide your IEP mandates. That could look like the school sending you an email. That could look like you sending them an email with what they said to you. That could be writing a letter and having them sign off on it. Email's the best way because there's a timestamp and date, and everyone has a copy. So if your placement offer, if they don't have everything, right? So let's say they have the ICT class, but they don't have the services, or they don't have the class, but they have the services. There are some options. The school can create what you need. So let's say the school doesn't have a 12-1, but your student requires the small special class. They can create the class if they have other students that need it. Realistically, they need to have other students that need it, or they won't be able to create the class for your student. So just want to be honest about the landscape that we live in, that while they have to service every student, they may really not be able to. And when that happens, then you get a new offer. Or these are one of the things you can do. So you can get a new offer, right? Let's say they just can't facilitate the class. You can then get an offer at a school that can. You can get an RSA letter if they don't have the services, right? So maybe they don't have the related services, OT provider or speech. You can get a related service authorization letter, and that authorizes an outside provider to get paid at no expense to you to provide the service that your student is mandated. Or you can get a P3 or P4 letter, and these are if they don't have the sets providers to if a student requires the sets. I have not received an offer yet at all. Okay, so if you don't have an offer, it's August 14th. So let's pretend it's August 15th. If you haven't received an offer letter, you're now eligible for a Nickerson letter or P1 letter. And we'll talk about that in a second. But I want to reiterate that New York City public schools must find an appropriate placement for your student. It is not the job of the parent or the family to find this placement, but you can support and by all means find the school you want and fight for it, but it's their job, not yours. All right. 1 second. All right, so no placement, now what? If the school can provide the educational class but cannot provide all the mandated related services, then you have the RSA letter that we spoke about, or the P3, P4. Again, the RSA is specific to the related services, and the P3, P4 is for the special education teacher support services. These require the providers to be licensed in New York State, and you must watch the expiration dates because these documents expire. So you will not be authorized forever to get this. You must find the provider and have them approved before the expiration date. Nickerson letter or P1 or P1R letter. Students are eligible when New York City schools misses the established placement timelines and should happen automatically. It doesn't always happen automatically, but it should. And again, because they know that they have not sent you an offer by June 15th, if you are in kindergarten or a 12-month program, right? Because if you're recommended for 12-month program, let's say District 75 or extended school year, you can't get an offer in August if you're supposed to start in July. And then August 15th for all other situations. And again, these are federal deadlines. So once August 15th comes and you don't have a placement, you are entitled to a Nickerson P1R letter. These letters expire within 1 year. Again, this fluctuates depending on the date that you're issued the letter, but the letter is good for that school year. If the letter was issued after March 15th, then it's good for the following school year as well. So it's good for March to June, and then for the following September to, well, depending on what program you have, right? But whether your school year starts in July or September, you're eligible for that following school year. And this process is only for state-approved non-public schools. There are not approved schools, but the Nickerson letter will only authorize payment to state-approved schools. If you feel that you're eligible for a Nickerson letter but have not received one, you can email nickersons@schools.nyc.gov and copy special education at schools.nyc.gov. And I have included this information in a later slide with contacts. But again, it should happen automatically. It doesn't always. So we are at these established dates. And if you don't have an offer, your a first good step is to reach out and find out. New York City Public Schools must find an appropriate public school placement within 60 days from the time it receives consent to evaluate or a referral for review. So if you don't have an IEP, then it would be that initial consent. And if you do have an IEP, then it would be the referral review, which again, you would sign consent for. The school offered does not have the appropriate special small class, or there has been no placement offer. So these are situations that you would then be entitled to this Nickerson letter. So if you go to the school or you call the school, right? Or let's say first day comes and they don't have the 12 and your IEP says 12 and they say, we don't have the space to create this class. We don't have the students to create this class. They could just say, we don't do that. And that may not be consistent with the law, but it could happen. And that situation, again, needs to be documented. You need to have proof that they said they cannot offer what your IEP mandates. And then that would get you eligibility for the Nickerson, or if just you haven't received a placement offer at all. The Committee on Special Education, also known as the CSE, is supposed to give you a form or voucher, again known as the Nickerson letter, also called a P1 letter, also called a P1R letter, authorizing parents to enroll their child in a state-approved non-public school, private school, at public expense by a certain date. And here we've included the list of approved schools because caregivers are expected to contact the schools and find a school that has the appropriate placement, class size, that services your students' classification, and has an opening. So when you get this letter, once they approve it and they give you the authorization, the parent's responsible to find this placement. They will give you a list. So the central based support team may give you a list of 4 or 5 schools that fit your students' needs or that they feel fit the IEP profile. And then you can call those schools. But again, you can also go to this list and research to your heart's desire. New York City non-public schools must accept your student. So even if you did all those other things, they have to say they're going to take the student. They have to serve the student's classification. Again, remember, the NPS schools are highly specialized. Some schools may only do learning disabilities. Some schools may only do autism. Some schools may only do emotional disability. So you have to ensure, you could love the school and it could be great. You need to then have a discussion about your classification. The school must have the related services or comparable programming. So we know that New York City Public Schools doesn't always have the related services, but these schools are required to have them before you can use a P1 letter for placement here. So if you have 5 services, they need to have those 5, or they need to be able to prove that their programming, their curriculum builds in some of that. So it may say that you require sets. Maybe you require sets, and maybe they don't do sets, but they do small group instruction in the 4 main subjects. And so that would be comparable to getting sets, which is small group instruction and the support of the special education teacher, because that sets group is going to have the support of that small group will have the support of a teacher. So then that would be comparable programming. They must have a similar class ratio. So again, we mentioned that not all schools have all ratios, and you may, I know in preschool special education, sometimes you'll see a class of 10, but they don't have that in New York City public schools, right? Or in New York, maybe you have a student coming in from Yonkers and the smallest class they have is an 8, but maybe we have MPS schools with 6s and 8s. So it just has to be a similar ratio. It can't be significantly disproportionate to what's recommended. Placement must be approved before the P1 letter expires. Again, I can't stress enough to watch your expiration dates, please. I would hate for you to lose a Nickerson letter. Sometimes it's called like a golden ticket, and I would hate families to lose the opportunity because of an expiration date. A Nickerson letter is not a non-public school recommendation. So just want to reiterate that the Nickerson letter is only when New York City Public Schools misses a deadline, doesn't offer placement by the deadline, or the school that is offered doesn't have what the IEP requires. To get a non-public school recommendation through the IEP process, the IEP would then say defer to CBST. So it wouldn't be a Nickerson letter. The IEP would indicate that the setting is that it's deferred. So just want to make everyone aware that that expiration date on that Nickerson letter means you have to reauthorize it every year, which means that if you really like the school you're at, you have to prove every year that that's the most appropriate setting for your child. And again, it is typical to allow a student to stay if they're thriving, but just understand you have to justify that reauthorization every year, and it's kind of a lot of work on the parents. And just remember, New York City students are always eligible for free and public education. So should you do an NPS school and want to come back to a public school, that is fine. Should you want to try to use your Nickerson letter because you don't have a placement, but ask for a public school placement, you can do that too, because maybe you want that setting, it's just not available. Know your rights. There are informal and formal ways of dealing with placement issues. Whichever path you choose, document, document, document. Write everything down. I can't stress enough how much value there is to documenting everything because you ensure that you are always good. And those are your receipts for your justifications. So an informal dispute resolution path would be starting with your school, your parent coordinator, principal, IEP coordinator, if you have one. You can then escalate to the district where there's a family support coordinator. There may be a district family advocate, and there's always a superintendent and their team. And then New York City Public School Central Office of Special Education, should you still need support. And the email and phone number are included, and that is specialeducation@schools.nyc.gov and 718-935-2007. So formal dispute resolution, mediation is an option that is it's formal, but it's the less formal of the two. And this is voluntary on both sides. So the school would have to agree and the parents to sit down and have this private conversation where they're going to talk about the IEP and where they disagree. And a third party neutral trained facilitator known as the mediator would be there, and they would facilitate the conversation and try to get both sides to find middle ground. It doesn't always mean that you're going to get what you want. It just means that everyone is okay with what they come out with at the end of this. And then again, the parties decide together what they're okay living with. And then if all issues are not resolved, parties can still go to an impartial hearing. So maybe 3 or 4 issues were resolved in mediation. You can still go to an impartial hearing for what you were not able to come to an agreement on. And then the impartial hearing or the due process complaint is a legal proceeding. I like to explain it to parents like, catching a case, like you're going to court. And this is going to be led by an impartial hearing officer, an IHO. They're going to be in charge of the conversation. So it's not like the mediator facilitating. This person is actually in charge. And they're also they're in charge of the outcome. They're going to listen to all the information and they're going to render a decision in writing, because if it's not in writing, it's not real. So document everything. And your documenting is going to really support you here, because they're only using what the witnesses and the documentation says. So if you don't have the documentation, you may not be able to prove your case. Now, these decisions can be appealed, but this is where documentation is important, is that in the appeals process, they're not going to have another hearing. They're not going to take new evidence. They're going to use everything that was already provided. So you need to make sure you provide everything, and you need to make sure, if you're thinking about this, that you're documenting everything forever. Honestly, you should document from the moment your child starts school, and we have really great workshops on documenting and organizing as well. And if you want a non-approved private school placement, it requires an impartial hearing in New York City. So you'll have to get an impartial for that, and a Nickerson letter will not work. So who can help with kindergarten placement? The KIP representative, and then we have the emails here, kindergarten IEP process at schools.nyc.gov, and the Committee on Special Education, as well as Family Welcome Centers, or you can call 311, and they'll all need to know child's name, child's date of birth, school or CSE information, and a description of your concern. Who else can help? So these are different offices that can support with various things that we discussed throughout the presentation. So the D75 placement office, special education hotline, it's the special education inbox, also the Division of Specialized Instruction and Student Support is a great resource. The superintendent's office for District 75. We have on another page how to find superintendents for all the other districts, specialized programs, Nickerson support, and of course the committees on special education. These are some other helpful contacts. If you're interested in these programs, you can also go to the link at the bottom and find all of the specialized programs. And these are some resources and our references. And that is all about placement. So on the screen, you see our intake line. Please take a screenshot. You see the hours we're available, as well as our email. If you need any support with anything we discussed, or if you're interested in going down any of these paths, or if you just have questions, please contact us. And now we'll go to question and answers. I'll hand it back to my colleague, Ms. Rodriguez. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Rima. As I mentioned earlier, we will now be opening the floor for Q&A with our presenter. Please make sure to write all your questions in the Q&A or the chat. So Rima, I see that we do have a question from our pre-registration. The first question is, if the parent doesn't submit an application for high school and the student is attending an ASD specialized program in middle school, what could happen and what are the parents' options then? Sorry, Rima, you're on mute.
Thank you. So say that again. They applied through the regular process, but they're interested in NEST?
So the parents submit an application for high school and the student is attending the ASD specialized program in middle school. What could happen and what are the parents' options then?
Got it. So when you applied for the high schools, there was the option to search by specialized program. So there you were able to apply for NEST high schools or D1 through 32 high schools. And you could even apply to the D1 through 32 high school that has the NEST program, but not apply through the NEST program. So that's how the application would look. And then you would get the offers, right? You would either get a Nest offer or you would get a high school a D1 through 32 offer that's not specialized. And then you would decide which of those you wanted. Now, we do know that the Nest program has limited seats, but um, as far as enrolling admissions placement, that's what it looks like. And then you would get all the offers for all the programs you applied to, regardless whether it was Nest or D1 through 32.
Thank you. Moving on to the next question. When should you begin applying for elementary school?
Again, this is like the question earlier with middle school. All of the application programs have dates, right? So application period opens for pre-K, opens for kindergarten, opens for middle school, opens for high school. That process is always like that. So it's going to open at a certain time and close at a certain time, and you have to apply within that window. The specialized programs, you can apply outside of the window, but you have a better chance of getting in during that window because that's when students are leaving and entering.
Thank you. Next question. Who is the initial contact person when applying for kindergarten? Or
The
district, I would say.
the school. So like when you're applying for kindergarten, you're usually going through you're with CPSE and you're coming into CSE. So you're leaving the childhood preschool special education, and you're going to have the facilitators from there, and they're going to do you're leaving IEP, right? And then you're going to go through the process, the kindergarten IEP process, where you get all these evaluations and you get your updated psychological and everything. Once you do that, it's going to get forward to the kindergarten IEP team or to the CSE, and they're going to be in charge of then supporting with that placement. Again, remember the kindergarten admissions process is separate from the kindergarten IEP process. So if you applied in the admissions, you may get an admissions offer. And if they can support the IEP, then that would likely be the offer that you would get through your kindergarten offer process, the kindergarten IEP process. Um, but in general, that comes from the CSE for IEPs, unless you applied in the kindergarten application as well.
Thank you, Dima. Another question is, soon I am interested in exploring a private school setting. Is that a lengthy process?
So yes, it's a lot of work, right? So if you would want a private school and the private school is not recommended, or let's frame it differently. If you see that your student is struggling and the current placement is not meeting their needs, that is a good time to ask for a private school. That is what you have to focus on when you're asking for that. So the private school placement, you're going to have to prove why the public school placement doesn't meet the needs. And you have to explore all the different public school options and say why they don't meet the needs. And then it's helpful to know what school you want to go to, so you can say that this school has this, or that, and make your case for why that would be the most appropriate setting for your student. Because at the end of the day, you're only entitled to a free and appropriate, not the most appropriate, but you can make the case for most appropriate, which then equates to meaningful progress, right? So school, the point is for your student to learn and to make meaningful progress. And the argument would be that my student would make more meaningful progress at this more appropriate place.
Thank you, Dima. So we have one more question. When can I begin applying for 3K?
So same answer as the kindergarten and middle school question. As soon as the application opens, again, the IEP process is it's initiated on your IEP schedule. So if you realize that the application opens in March and that your IEP is in April, you might want to ask them to move your IEP up to October or December and get your IEP done in advance of the application opening to everybody. so that you know what your child needs. Because if you apply to a program and then get accepted and later find out your child needs something they don't have, you've already lost the opportunity to then apply to other programs that do have what your child needs. So you have to follow the dates and deadlines, but it's always good to try to have your IEP moved before that happens so that it can be finalized. And again, most of these things happen, you have to check specifically. The 3K, pre-K, middle school, all those dates are different and they change slightly every year. So check what date it is and make sure your IEP is done before that.
Thank you, Rima. So thank you so much. Those are the rest of our questions. I want to thank everybody so much for joining us today. We hope that you enjoyed today's presentation on placement for parents of children with disabilities. A special thanks to our presenter for leading this webinar on such a great, important topic. So now I want to encourage you, the audience, to complete our survey. It will show up on your screen shortly, and I will also be including the link on the chat. If you guys can take just a few minutes to complete the survey, we really appreciate it. And if you have any questions that you guys would like for me to share with the presenter directly, please let me know and I will get you in contact with her. Thank you. I want to also thank Martin for being present today. Thank you for your support. It's always wonderful to have you. You guys will also have a chance to complete the survey. It will be attached to our follow-up email.
I want to thank everybody on Facebook for joining us. And you can also complete the survey. And but we're going to disconnect for our Facebook friends. Thank you and have a wonderful day.
So thank you again, everyone that joined us today. As Rima said, have a wonderful rest of your day. And that concludes our webinar for today. Thank you.